right, Phil, you're going to stick with us as we bring in a victim of the Las Vegas mass shooting and trial attorney Brian Claypool. He joins our discussion now. Thank you so much for being with us, Brian. You just heard the report from Phil and the activity that took place in our state's capital today. What do you make of these proposed new laws?
Well, I think one of those proposed new laws is great, and that is allowing people to sue manufacturers of guns, right, and devices, because there haven't been any consequences for manufacturers in most states across the country. And if we have that now, that might limit the distribution of guns. In other words, if they get in the hands of a bad person and the bad person does something with that gun, then manufacturers should be liable. So I think that was helpful. But Marla, at the end of the day, you've got to take a close look at each mass shooting. And in this Sacramento mass shooting, the problem here was our criminal justice system, not really the guns. I mean, these two individuals, if they are responsible for the shooting, neither of them should have been on the street if our state parole boards were working properly. They shouldn't have been paroled.
Yeah, and the Sacramento County District Attorney agrees with you. She's now running for Attorney General of the state. Anne Marie Schubert fought back against that parole hearing, and yet the parole decision was ultimately reached. Let's bring Phil Schuman back in the conversation. Phil.
Well, Brian, you certainly have a unique perspective on this as a survivor and also as an attorney. I agree with you that the law permitting lawsuits against gun manufacturers is perhaps the most significant. But don't you expect like vigorous opposition from gun organizations like the NRA in terms of lawsuits that would delay something like that?
Yeah, Phil, there's no question about it. I met you shortly after the Vegas shooting. And after that shooting, I thought the answer to the problem was clearly to eliminate guns, right? Well, specifically assault weapons. And here we have, I think one of these individuals used what's called a slide device. It's kind of like a bump stock that was used by Paddock in Vegas. What that means for your viewers is you can take a semi-automatic weapon, manipulate it with a device to make it an automatic weapon where you pull your trigger and it just automatically shoots. So we obviously need to get rid of these devices, and you're right, it will be hard up against the NRA. But look, at the end of the day, owning a gun is a responsibility, and we have to take a hard look at who has guns. Like, you have to sign up for a gun. Once you get the gun, if you've got some domestic violence charges, you shouldn't have that gun. And then we also need to be looking again, Phil, I think this is really important. You know, there are red flags with all of these shootings. And in the Sacramento shooting, we've got massive red flags. You've got two unsavory people that should not be on the street. So we've got to be taking a closer look at prosecuting criminals, keeping them incarcerated, and then keeping those guns out of their hands.
But do you think, though, that idea of being able to sue the gun manufacturers is, in fact, legal? I mean, the Newsom administration is essentially doing this as a giant kind of middle finger to the Supreme Court because they're upset about what's happening in Texas, where you can sue over somebody else getting an abortion, and they're basically saying this as a way to try to get that lawsuit thrown out, that they're bringing this thing instead. Do you think there's sound legal ground as an attorney for this?
Well, I think absolutely. I mean, I think the issue, Alex, of whether somebody can sue a manufacturer should be left to a jury. In other words, this shouldn't be decided by a judge or a U.S. Supreme Court. In my opinion, the issue is it boils down to a legal concept called foreseeability and causation, right? So the causation argument would be like, well, we just made the gun. How can we? That wasn't the cause of the shooting. It was somebody else using the gun. But there's a doctrine, Alex, that talks about if somebody misuses a gun or misuses a product, and that misuse of that product is reasonably foreseeable, then the manufacturer of that product should be liable. That there should be no. This happens all the time in product liability law. Why is it not happening with guns? Guns are a product, and we should be letting juries decide across the country about whether it's reasonably foreseeable that guns can get in the hands of bad people and they misuse that gun. So that, again, that's something I think that jurors should be deciding, not courts.
Well, Brian, it's pretty astounding to think that we're coming up on the 5 years since the Las Vegas mass shooting that you survived. So, and we know that when you hear about a mass shooting, it opens up that wound all over for you again. So we thank you so much for taking the time to be with us tonight and lend your perspective. Brian Claypool, trial attorney. Phil Schuman, thank you as well for your reporting.